This episode is brought to you by Morty, Buzzshot, Cogs by Clockwork Dog, Recon, and Patreon supporters like you.
Cogs by Clockwork Dog is an easy-to-use software-hardware platform for running interactive events, including escape rooms and other immersive experiences. Their plug-and-play hardware seamlessly integrates with their software, so you can create a show with lighting and sound cues without having to write a single line of code. Map all kinds of inputs to outputs by building up simple logic steps, which determine what you want to happen and when. Cogs 5 is now available. There's new and improved functionality, including remote connectivity, Zigbee connections to power smart bulbs, buttons, and switches. There's an app that turns any smartphone into your own media master. There's MIDI support to connect keyboards and instruments, as well as relay support. There is also Buzzshot integration, so you can pull the player's information directly into the game. Get the Cogs starter set for only $130 plus free shipping to the USA. This bundle is usually valued at $257. You can learn more and purchase your starter set at cogs.show. Use code REPOD at checkout. That's REPOD. Link and details in the show notes.
Welcome to the Reality Escape Pod, your lifeline when you need a getaway from the real world. I'm David Spira, alongside my co-host, PG Law. Together, we're exploring immersive gaming from all angles, and we'll be joined by guests who really know their stuff. This season, we are shining a spotlight on Southern California in celebration of our convention, Recon, which will be in Universal City, California on August 18th and 19th, 2024. Tickets are on sale now at realityescapecon.com. And today's guests are the owners of Crossroads Escape Games in Anaheim, California, Madison and Luke Rhoades. Since 2016, they have been entertaining guests with some of the most innovative and format-breaking escape rooms in the world. From the iconic experience, the Hex Room, to their most recent masterpiece, The Weeping Witch, they have carved out a niche, making beautiful, unique, and grim adventures. Welcome, Madison and Luke.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I remember when I was a little baby escape roomer, I'd not even played 10 rooms, and people were telling me about this really incredible game called the Hex Room. And it was so cool. You got to do a personality test. You're all locked up in different little cells, and it was so amazing. And so for a very long time, that was like my holy grail. You know, I was like, I got to make my way down to Crossroads and play Hex Rooms. And that's why I am so thrilled to have you on today to talk to us.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us.
So let's get started a little bit on how the two of you met. I know that you're both theater kids and you've worked in the immersive industries for a long time now before you created Crossroads. So what's the backstory here?
We met in high school in drama class, and then we went on to college. We were really into theater. I did set design and fine art, and Luke did performance and scenic construction. After college, I would get jobs designing sets, and then Luke would build them, and then I would paint them, and we were kind of like this ultimate tag team duo. And then one night in 2014, Halloween night, we went and we played our very first escape room, but we thought it was a haunted house at the time. So we were really concerned when they locked the doors behind us with 10 other strangers, and we had to figure out how to get out. And it was absolute chaos, and we did so horrible, but it was like a mind-blowing experience for us. And we just became addicted to escape rooms instantly. And it was that night driving home that we actually came up with the Hex Room idea. But then we played a bunch of escape rooms after that. And, you know, in 2014, that was like all of them in California was like 30.
Yeah. So we did all of them.
We did all of them. Yeah. And we just saw that they were all fun, but they were lacking in the immersive environment. And we just felt like with our theater background, we could make that happen.
I feel like you definitely proved that out.
Thank you.
As you decided to make the leap and create Crossroads, it's my understanding that you two took a huge swing and the financial struggles were real. What went down in the early days of Crossroads?
Oh, gosh.
We were very young. We
Yeah.
opened Crossroads when I was 24 and Luke was 25. And we just put all of our money that we had saved up until that point into it before we were trying to save up for a house.
And we
And-
felt like we had a lot of money.
Yeah. And it
And-
was nowhere near what we actually needed. And it gets to a point where you're just in too deep and you just have to just keep spending money.
We just had this grand idea of what the Hex Room would be and what Crossroads would be. And we're like, yeah, we can do this, we can do this, and we can do this. There was just a bunch of bills that you just don't think about because you're thinking about your dream and what you want all the cool things to be and what people to do and stuff. And then there's all this bureaucracy that charges you so much money to go through. And we're like, oh, so we have no money to actually
Yeah.
make our dream come true.
By the time we got through just all of the permits and the paperwork and getting like the plans drawn by the architect and getting that through the city, getting the conditional use permit, there's just so much stupid stuff that took 6 months while paying rent on a space because we thought things would get done in a couple of weeks. People open businesses every day. There must be like a plan for this.
You really were young.
Yeah.
And there is no plan. It is all made up.
It is. And there's just roadblock after roadblock. I really feel like the city just thinks it would be easier if businesses didn't open because then they wouldn't have to do any work.
That's true.
So they would try to like, I don't know, just stop us or make us do stupid things just so they didn't have to do the paperwork for it. It was really hard.
So then we were borrowing money from our family members and friends, just like
Doing GoFundMes.
and
Opening up every single credit card I could get my hands on. You go to Best Buy and they're like, you want a credit card? I'm like, yes, I do. If you'll give it to me. Kohl's credit cards, Target credit card, you name it. I got them all.
working 16-hour days, doing everything ourselves from the ground up. And we did it.
We did it.
We made it work.
Wow, what a story.
And then I think a couple years after Hex Room was open for a while, we went back in and added a lot more of the things that we couldn't add in right away because we didn't have money. So we revamped Hex Room at some point. Yeah.
So how long did it take you after you finally got open to dig yourselves out of the hole that it sounds like you were in?
I would say it was probably like 4 years, 5 years.
Just in time for the pandemic. Great.
Yeah, it was actually. That year was the year we paid off all of our loans and we were like, oh, shoot, we might have to take out another one.
Yeah. So it's been like almost 10 years and we've made no money. It's great.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're paying the bills.
Yeah. Look, I'm very happy that you're at that point where you can comfortably do that. Only one of your games is truly scary, The Weeping Witch. We'll get more into that later on. All of your games appear to have their roots in horror. What inspires you creatively?
Oh, obviously, horror movies. I love horror movies so much. My thesis in college was about horror movies. I just see them as these art forms, especially the old ones, the 70s and 80s, where they use animatronics and they don't have CGI. Like the costumes and the props and what they create for these monsters or transformation scenes, like The Thing is one of my absolute favorites. I just think they're so amazing and so artistic. Even in like Nightmare on Elm Street and how they use blood as this paint basically is just so cool to me that I'm just always inspired by how they can create these unique worlds and these creatures. And there's really just no rules when it comes to a horror film.
I'm also a big fan of just haunts and immersive theater, escape rooms, and getting those scares to work, getting your audience in the proper spot at the proper time for the scare or for building suspense, things like that. You really have to get creative, especially when you're working in an escape room where the players can really do whatever they want. I think horror just offers more interesting challenges like that. And so it requires a little more creativity as a result.
I can confirm the effectiveness of your kind of grasp on timing in these games because I rarely got real good by jump scares, but you've got me a couple of times. I'm not someone who's like a tough guy trying not to be scared. Like, I always try to buy into the fiction that I'm playing, but I don't always feel the jump scares because they are so much about timing, and you do get that.
When you were talking about like timing and making sure the placement of the players is where you want it, what's the secret sauce to that? Do you have a formula for what makes for an effective scare?
What we like to do is we like to scare you, and then you think, okay, that was the scare. And then it goes a step further. So whether it's like the lights went off and you're like, oh, okay, that was the scary part. And then there's an extra scene that happens. Like, I think that's really what gets people.
The double down.
Yes, from like horror movies. I'm not a huge horror movie fan, but that gets me every time, where you have the buildup and then it's like the cat jumps out and you're like, oh, it was just the cat. And then the killer comes out and puts his arms around her throat or something. It gets me every time.
Yeah, you double down on it.
So before we dive into your games individually, you're probably the biggest risk takers in Southern California in terms of playing with different genres and formats and styles. For me, one of the defining characteristics of a Crossroads game is that they are structurally very different from other people's escape rooms, but also from one another. This, from my perspective, is really hard to pull off. I'm wondering where this creative risk-taking is coming from.
That's a good question.
I feel like we always just design something that we personally want to play. And I think I've played so many escape rooms now that are just average, and they're done by these enthusiasts. And I always feel even more disappointed after playing them, where I'm like, you love escape rooms, and you created a Sherlock Holmes game. And it's just, it hurts. So I feel like with us, we just always want to make something that we haven't seen before that we personally want to do. And I think that's where our best ideas come from, because we always think, wouldn't it be so cool if you had to like crawl in this little tunnel and then this happened? And then we just think that would be awesome if we saw it in another escape room. So let's just do it ourselves.
Yeah, that's the thing that I've really noticed when playing all of your games. You guys utilize so many different mechanics in it. You really take the concept of an escape room, and then I notice that you combine it with a different mechanic that really twists it on its head a little bit. And one of the best examples of that is Hex Room, which I talked about earlier. To this day, it's still one of the most unusual games that I've ever played from a structural standpoint. So do you want to talk a little bit about how it works, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty of it?
Sure. Hex Room, you take a character questionnaire and we cast you as stereotypical horror movie characters, the jock, the nerd, the virgin, so on. And you're all divided into separate rooms based on what character you get. And then you have to work between those rooms to try and reunite before you can all escape. And it is possible to leave some of your teammates behind if they're not able to get out of their section of the game in time. So the rest of you can succeed, beat the game, and one of your friends can lose and be left behind, which is pretty rare, but it has happened a few times.
Conceptually very funny.
Yeah.
Oh, they love it. Everyone loves it.
I love the groups that like stay to die together. They'll just like, huddle by the door and be like, we're not leaving without Brittany.
Those are great. Let go.
They all just die.
They can leave whatever they want, but they're like, no, we'll die with you, Brittany.
But the reason we came up with this plan was after playing so many escape rooms, we felt like we were missing that individual moment where you felt like the star. That's what everyone loves about escape rooms, is solving puzzles, right? And then sometimes you're with a group that's so large that is taken from you and someone else solves the puzzle, or you just feel like more like a spectator and you just don't really know what you've contributed. And that happens a lot with like newer players, or even just like a personality trait where you're just not the one to like jump in there. So the idea of the Hex Room and splitting everyone up was to like force people to have that moment where you're on your own. You have to solve these puzzles. You can't give up. And then it leaves everyone feeling really accomplished and proud of themselves. And what we always say is like the star of their own horror film.
Yeah, everybody comes out and says, look what I had to overcome.
Yeah.
Well, you guys all got it easy. I had to do this thing.
Yeah, and they're like, no, but I had to do this thing. And it lends itself to replayability too. You can come back, you could play again as a different character, which was a huge thing for us, because after playing so many games, if there was one that we really liked, we felt like we wanted to share that moment again with our friends and family that weren't there the first time, but it just wasn't the same experience for us the second time around. So we wanted to be able to provide something where you could have a great time and you can come back again and again with different family members or friends.
And I have come back and played it.
You make a good point, though, because whenever I talk about a puzzle that was my favorite puzzle, I'm the one that figured out this puzzle. And that's why it was my favorite. And David goes, I already knew that. Like, he just, anytime I love a puzzle, it's because I'm the one that solved it, right? So I love that you're creating these moments for everybody and they all get an equal chance. The other thing that you guys do is you do have a bonus puzzle that I think is really cool, too, that is also exclusively for that player. So each player gets an accessory that they have to solve, and that determines whether they lived or died at the end of the experience, right? And so I think that's actually a really fun aspect, too, of offering more individual puzzles for the players to solve.
Yeah, and that was also our way of allowing people who were more experienced to have the option to solve more puzzles if they brought friends along that weren't as experienced. So they could get through their set of challenges in their room and then go, you know what, I have the time. I can work on this bonus puzzle, where the inexperienced group members can focus on their main goal, which is just escaping. What's also fun, though, is sometimes people get really selfish and they just focus on their bonus puzzle and not on escaping their room. And then they come in like a big shot and they end up not escaping, but all their newbie friends do because they were able to prioritize their puzzles better. So that's also funny.
Yeah, we wanted to keep everyone engaged the whole time, even if you get out of your room really quickly. There's still things you can do to help your friends, and you can get your own special puzzle.
I'm wondering what lessons you as creators have taken away from designing and operating the Hex Room for so many years now. What are the positive and negatives that you have taken away from this game?
Oh.
You can talk to our game masters.
Yeah.
They would say that the reset is horrible.
I can see that.
That was a design flaw in Hex Room. It's still bad to this day. We've made it slightly better, but it wasn't very high on the priority list when we designed it. And so we got it open and we got people in and we're like, oh, players can and will move every single item that is movable. It's cleaning a toddler's room every hour.
Yeah, and there's so many
a lot of work.
pieces, like physical pieces that are important props that have to get moved, and they have to get moved from room to room. So no matter what, you're like moving things back from where they first were. And then as a set designer, I hate it when you go to a bookshelf and all the books are like stuck there. I really feel like it needs to move. It needs to feel real. As soon as it starts feeling like a set, you know, you're taken out of it. All the pieces move, every statue, every book you can pick up and look at. And yeah, it's created quite a reset.
So when we make games now, we're more focused in like still having movable items, things you can interact with, but having a lot of stuff that is stationary or up high that you can't get to. So it still feels full, still feels like you can interact. You're not being railroaded anywhere, but there's a lot fewer items that you can actually move around just to cut down on that reset. That was probably a biggest lesson we learned.
David always says that the length of reset time is his version of carbon dating for escape rooms. Usually the longer it takes to reset, he's like, I can tell this is an older game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's never a priority in your first game. And then after your first game and you realize just how much time you're burning on that reset, all of a sudden, your future reset times become a very relevant area for innovation.
Sometimes you have groups that run late, you know, and then it's like, oh, we have to reset this room really quick. And it takes 10, 15 minutes to reset the room no matter what. Then all your games are going to run late. Where, you know, if you just have like a faster reset room, you can just accommodate those late players easier and then not be set off for the whole day. That's kind of the biggest reason. And then Hex Room is also just like, there's a lot of crouching and crawling and it's very physical to reset. You got to get ladders out and
Yeah, not everything's at eye level.
Yeah.
There's things up here and things down here.
yeah, it's just exhausting.
We're taking a moment to thank our sponsor, Morty. Morty is a free app for discovering, planning, tracking, and reviewing escape rooms, haunts, and other immersive social outings. And Morty is now available for all to use on its fantastic website experience, iPhone app, and its new Android app, available in the Google Play Store now. I believe in Morty so much that I have a stake in it as an advisor. PG, Morty has done a thing that I'm really excited about. They have added the entire findable catalog of tabletop escape games to the Morty database. So us players can log not only our real life games, but also our tabletop games.
Oh, that is super useful. I did not know that. You can learn more at morty.app/repod. That's REPOD to sign up and get a special badge for our listeners. Link and details in the show notes. Do you think that it's intimidating for new players or people who have never played an escape room? Do you think that's like a turnoff because they're like, oh my God, I'm on my own?
Maybe a little. I feel like I may have heard that before, but we did notice that new players were having a really tough time in the Hex Room because they were on their own, but they're new to escape rooms, so they really don't have anything else to compare it to. So most of the time they don't initiate that and say like, oh, I'm not prepared for this game. When we first opened it and we were game mastering it, we realized, oh, this is a little more advanced than the customers are ready for right now, which is why when we made Funhouse, that one is more of a linear game, a little bit more linear, and you're all together, working together, and still has its own elements that we threw into it.
But I also want to clarify that in Hex Room, you are physically divided, but you're not alone. So there are still ways to communicate with the rest of your group. And that's a big reason, too, why we do the questionnaire, is to place people in a room that we think would fit them the best. So there's questions on there of like, how many games have you played? And then there's other just like personality test questions where we see like what fear level is, like what they feel comfortable with as far as scares.
Yeah.
So we make sure people are put in the best possible room and they can communicate with someone who maybe is a little bit more experienced to help them out.
That makes sense. For me, Hex Room is an interesting and important game in the development of escape room culture. I think it's one of the first games that I can recall people traveling for, not just as individuals, but coordinating groups to do it. Because 6 players exactly, no more, no less, is the perfect number of people to play this with, which is an unusual travel size. It's just an unusual team size in escape rooms. And this was one of the first that people were coordinating online, like meeting strangers to go and play. And I think a lot of the current escape room ethos amongst enthusiasts is because of Hex Room.
That's cool to think about.
I can't prove it.
We just provided something different. And I think that's what people were excited about. Because even when escape rooms were still new, they just were all very similar. Mm-hmm. And we loved them, but it got bland after a while, which was why we really felt like the Hex Room was needed to kind of show people that an escape room is more than just being in a room solving puzzles. We can change it up a little bit. And I think that's what people were drawn to.
Speaking of changing things up, your now closed game, Psych Ward, which was renamed as Trust Experiment, is one of my very favorite closed games.
Yay.
It blended escape rooms with social deduction, and for me at least, it was an incredible experience. We have a whole Spoilers Club episode that higher level patrons can check out this game and learn all about it. But for those who are unfamiliar with it, can you give the high level explanation of how it worked?
It was a complicated game. It was basically like a werewolf, where there are some people who know their true identity. In this case, they were insane, and other people who were sane. And the insane people were trying to get more points than the sane people, and they did that by stealing it. And you were able to get points throughout the game by solving puzzles. So you had to kind of like make alliances, because every time a puzzle was solved, 2 people had to scan to get points. If one of that person was insane, they would steal all those points. So it was great. It broke a lot of friendships. And
There's also underlying.
Absolutely. David was getting so mad at me playing this game.
I was getting so in your head.
People did pinky promises.
Well, David, I remember during our game, because David was actually one of the bad guys, and I was getting so into it that I was like watching his arm as he's inputting the buttons. I was like, I could see the tendons moving on the left side, which meant you push the insane. But, I was being so crazy about this, and he was getting so mad. He called in the ref to be like, I don't think this is in the spirit of how we're supposed to play this.
Looking at the tendons in your hand.
I also was getting performatively frustrated and pulling you aside and being like, PG, I think you're taking this too seriously. I think you're really starting to put people off.
I had my magnifying glass out and everything. I was like putting the screws to people. But this was right up my alley because I've been playing lot of social deduction games at the time. It was very Survivor-esque. And I was like, this is the best thing ever. I loved it. But again, I can see how this would be intimidating for people who have never played a social deduction game. Or if you're the bad guy and you're like, I have no idea what that means or how to play this off. There's so many risks to running an experience like this.
Yeah, I think that was probably the biggest problem was that people weren't ready for the extra challenge of that. Like, it comes with a lot of anxiety to think that you might have to also act and put on this face with your friends. I would say for the most part, though, people were down for it. They wanted to do something new. But yeah, I do see that in hindsight. Maybe it was a little too much for its time.
People who had played social deduction games before, that's the only one they were interested in at Crossroads. They were like, I want to play that one. And people who hadn't played social deduction games were like, ooh, that sounds too difficult for me. And that was a challenge getting over while it was around.
I think that game was very ahead of its time. And I think if you ever remount it at some point in the future, I think it will find an even bigger audience over time. Because I think you were playing with a lot of really clever ideas with it.
Thanks. I'm so happy with it. I was really proud of it. I'm sad that it's gone, but it made way for the Weeping Witch. I'm probably even more proud of that one. But it was just us stepping out of the box. We got really into board games, and that was just our way of trying to make like a board game come to life.
And you very much achieved that in ways that I never would have imagined possible. It had all of the different feelings you needed from both the escape room side, from the social deduction side, which I think it's hard to make a good social deduction game in general. And then you also had it wrapped in this whole 50s post-war authority experiment thing that was grim and a little messed up.
And you had an actor. You had an incredible actor/game master that really brought it to life. The one that we had was great. He was funny. He kind of refereed. He really made us feel like we were immersed in this whole experiment.
Yeah, all of our game masters took on their own personality with it, and they were all just fantastic. They're all just like these different messed up orderlies that were like taking care of you.
Being theater people, we hire a lot of actors, so it was perfect for them.
Yeah, they all did just such a great job.
I just want to take a moment. I don't know if we defined what a social deduction game is or how it works. So a social deduction game is typically like a board game that we mentioned, Werewolf, where one or two of the players are like the bad guy, right? And through the game, you have to make some decisions where the bad guys will sabotage the goals of the team. And one of the main goals of the entire game is to figure out who is the traitor.
Among Us is a really popular one. The little colored astronaut guys. You've probably seen those. That's a social deduction
Oh, yeah. And
game.
that came out almost the same time as Psych Ward 2.
Yeah.
So it made it very easy to explain when people were like, what is this? It's Among Us.
Yeah, it's Werewolf, it's Mafia. It's all rooted in the campfire game tradition of you don't have a lot of components. You just have people, and people are generally pretty decent at lying to each other.
You just got to gaslight your friends is all.
Yeah.
So, speaking of which, this incredible game sadly had to close, but it did make way for your latest game, The Weeping Witch, which I loved. And I thought I was dead inside. I thought I was immune to horror games. This game scared the living daylights out of me. And it definitely felt like a big step forward for Crossroads. So how did the idea for this game come about?
In 2019, we did the Seance, which was an immersive theater experience. And we did that in the attic of Crossroads. And it was, you were sitting around a table. You had one actress who held this seance, and then you would go into the other side of the veil, and there were these puppets that were the ghosts, and we had a lot of really great special effects set up where doors would open on their own, and there'd be different, I don't want to give away too much, but it was really cool. I was really proud of it. I wrote and directed it, and it was just for the Halloween season, so it was only on for like a month and a half. And then after that, we just had all these cool props still left over, but we didn't want to keep doing something in our attic. It was very much a temporary space. When we had the space open up from the psych ward, it was like, hey, we could use this stuff again and we can continue this story of Madame Ruby and what happened to her after the seance. But we wanted to make it more of a escape room, where the other one was very much theatrical. You sat around a table, you watched the show happen. There were a couple of things where you got up and you solved some puzzles, but for the most part, it was a theater show. So this one, we wanted to do that continuation of the story, but have it be a little bit more hands-on.
And we learned so much from Psych Ward and from the seance as far as how to make these things work and what works and what doesn't. And like, we just could put all that knowledge into a Weeping Witch.
Buzzshot is escape room software powering business growth, player marketing, and improving the customer experience. They offer an assortment of pre- and post-game features, including robust waiver management, branded team photos, and streamlined review management for Yelp, TripAdvisor, Google Reviews, and Morty. Buzzshot now also has integration with our other REPOD sponsors, Morty and Cogs.
The Buzzshot Business Dashboard provides you and your staff real-time data and operational insights to help you run your business. No more Excel spreadsheets. All your business and player data is stored safely and securely, all searchable in one place. Track details, analytics, and stats across all of your rooms and venues to ensure excellent customer satisfaction.
Abby Leon from Quest Club Escape Adventures had this to say about Buzzshot. It's a point-and-shoot waiver, contact aggregator, and camera solution that would normally take several apps otherwise. It's an easy choice and super affordable. Streamline your marketing and grow your escape room business. REPOD listeners get an extended free trial and 20% off your first 3 months with no setup fees or hidden charges. Visit buzzshot.com/REPOD, that's REPOD, to learn more. Link and details in the show notes. You said you learned a lot from Psych Ward and the Seance. Can you think of any specific tips or lessons that you learned from those two experiences?
Yeah, so we played around with one that comes to mind in the seance. We played around with EMF meters, which was really fun.
What's an EMF meter?
If you ever see ghost hunting shows, they'll often use EMF meters. They're electromagnetic field detectors. I think they're supposed to help you find conduit in the walls and stuff.
Yep.
That's really what they're for. And occasionally they'll just pick up random EMF waves, and so the lights will light up. And it's like, what caused that? So everybody goes, ghosts. So it's a ghost finding tool. So we incorporated them into the seance, and they were dotted around the space. And then the ghosts could communicate yes, no through these devices. But obviously we wanted them to work 100% of the time, so we rigged them to activate on their own. And it was really cool when it worked. It was really cool because you go, are you here with us? And then it lights up, boom, and you're like, oh my gosh, the ghost is here.
And it's not like a corded device. It's a handheld remote device.
You can take it around the room.
Which is important to me.
Yeah, which was super cool. But the radio transmitter, again, if it doesn't work that one time, it's horrible. We have EMF meter in the Weeping Witch, and it's done in such a way that it works flawlessly, and it's a really kind of magical moment. It's really fun. So we still kept those kind of elements, but just made them more reliable. Wireless is horrible. It's a great idea. It doesn't work.
It was important for it to be wireless in the seance because you had to walk around with it. But in the Weeping Witch, it's used as a puzzle. So it's kind of part of this larger device. So it makes more sense that it's attached to the device.
One of the things I had noticed you do a lot of in the Weeping Witch is using a lot of really clever player positioning techniques. You are constantly herding the cats that are escape room players into very specific places at very specific times. What can you share with us about how you've been working with that as a tool?
I think that just comes from my set design background. I was always told to think about where the actors are on stage and how to make it look more dynamic for an audience. So with an escape room, you, the audience, are the actors. And I think it still is important to think the same way of if you have multiple puzzles that can be solved at the same time, they're not all in the same part of the room. You know, you forcefully spread people out so they're not just on top of each other solving puzzles. You always think about each step of the escape room as what would it look like in a proscenium type setting. But then on top of that, you're kind of also looking for levels. That's a big thing with set design is who's up on the stairs, who's crouched down. So it's also creating these puzzles in different spaces. So not everything's at eye level. Some people have to look at something down low or input something down low on your tippy toes, looking for some sort of information on the sign that's a little bit too high. So I think that also helps know where everyone is based upon where the puzzles are and at what time. So then we can decide when the scares happen, where they are situated to get the best effect of that scare.
That makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I observed about the Weeping Witch and also Psych Ward / Trust Experiment is that the game occupies a fairly small footprint. It's not a lot of space, but in my memory, the game feels substantially bigger. I'm imagining that you were doing a lot of deliberate thinking about how to maximize that space. What were you trying to do with it?
Well, with the psych ward, it was really important that it was really a small space. And fun fact, this area was actually the final room of the Hex Room when we very first opened it. But it was just too large of a space for this final event. So we actually cut that off and then turned it into its own little game. We've played small escape rooms before, and sometimes it just feels cheap because it's so small. But I feel like as a designer, having a small space helps corral people a little bit better, helps them work together too.
Easier to fill with interesting things to look at.
Yeah. So the psych ward made sense that it was in a small space because you're in a psych ward and it's all about this trust and betrayal that being this physically close to people added to it. The social aspect was heightened because you couldn't physically go somewhere else and have a secret conversation.
Yeah, you're lying to everybody, but they're sitting right next to you.
Yeah. So then with Weeping Witch, it was the same idea. This is such a small space. There's nowhere to run and hide. It's just this little room that you're stuck in. And I think it just lent itself well to that idea.
People ask us, they're like, do we have to run in this game? It's
to where?
And I always tell them there's nowhere to run. And that makes it worse for them.
Yeah.
I will say that even for being a small space, though, Weeping Witch is probably one of the harder escape rooms that I've played. And I don't mean that in a negative way. One of the things that I loved about it is that you didn't dumb down the puzzles because it was scary. Most horror escape rooms, there's not that many puzzles or they're not that hard because rightfully so, they probably assume that people have a hard time thinking correctly when they're so scared. But I found the puzzles to be really complex and layered and nuanced and challenging. But that's part of what I really enjoyed about it. So I don't want listeners to think, oh, it's small, it's probably not that difficult. This was probably one of the more challenging rooms.
That was probably one of the more challenging parts of the design, too.
Yeah, we had to restructure the game quite a few times and we had to cut a few puzzles. But that was important to me because I've done these scary escape rooms where you're too scared to solve puzzles. So that's why it's dumbed down. But then you don't feel successful afterwards because you don't feel like you really solved anything. You just put red with red, you know? So in the Weeping Witch, it was important to me to have these scary moments. And then there's clearly a sense of, okay, we're safe now. We can continue solving puzzles, and then scary moment. And now puzzle solving time. So that way you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's actually one of the smartest things that you guys did with Weeping Witch was you make it very clear from the beginning of the game that there is going to be a moment and you know it's going to be the scary moment. And then you give a very clear signal to the players of when does this puzzling stop and now it's time to be scared. And I thought it was a really great effect. And it didn't stop it from being scary. Actually, if anything, it almost heightened it a little bit more because now you're primed to expect something, but you don't really know quite what.
Yeah, I tell everyone that it's not really jump scary. It's more nightmare inducing.
I can confirm.
I want to talk a little bit about your second game, Funhouse, which I always forget is your second game because it is your most straightforward escape room. It is still aesthetically and from a feel standpoint, I think it still has an incredibly unique presence to it. But what were your thoughts when you were approaching making something that was a bit more traditional?
Because we had Hex Room, we opened that in January of 2016. And it was when people were still figuring out what escape rooms were. And it was a challenging first game for people who just had no idea what they were stepping into, that we felt we needed to have a game available to people who needed that learning curve, I think, that we all go through with our first escape room. And then the Hex Room is also for ages 16 and up because of that individual aspect to it. Not necessarily that it's like super scary, but because you're alone and because you have to be able to relay important information to help your teammates, we found you had to be of a certain maturity level to be a good teammate, that we were missing out on a pretty big audience of children who also wanted to do escape rooms, or just like parents who wanted to bring their kids along. So the Funhouse happened because we felt we needed to have more of a beginner game, and we wanted to have a kids option to allow for this younger group to get into escape rooms, because no escape room was open for kids at the time.
Would you do another traditional escape room, or is that something that you're not going to approach again in the future?
I think we're always going to have some new element in the games.
Even Funhouse, I would say its new element was its hint system.
Yeah.
It was like you had to interact with Zoltar, who was an actor on the other side of this magical talking painting, and you had to do things to impress Zoltar to get hints. And that was a really big thing. You know, it wasn't a walkie-talkie or like a piece of paper being slipped under the door. This interactive hint system was totally unique for its time.
And made it your game.
Yeah.
So nobody else had your Funhouse game because your Zoltar was special to you.
Yeah, we would have our actors tailor what they say and what jokes they say to what type of audience that they had. So it was very personalized. But to answer your question, I don't know if a traditional escape room is needed anymore. I think enough people know about escape rooms. I think there are obviously elements to escape rooms that will always be there, like solving puzzles and stuff. But we do have plans to actually close Funhouse and do something new there that will still be pretty different.
I can't wait.
I love Funhouse, though. I think Funhouse is really fun. It is a fun house.
It's going on like 8 years old. I just feel like we know so much now. We can do better. Even though people love it and it's still selling.
It's doing fine.
We just know in our hearts we can make it more.
I believe that. I will also go and say, because I was just giving this advice to someone who messaged me on Discord the other day. If you are going out to Crossroads and you are already planning on playing the Hex Room and the Weeping Witch, just throw in Funhouse. You're going through the hassle to drive out there. You are obviously an enthusiast. Play the Funhouse. Just play the games in this building.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I recently had the chance to come visit your latest venture, Slashers, Axe Throwing, and Ales. And you were able to put your own spin onto this concept. And the end product to me felt like something that was really sharply honed. See what I did there?
Very clever.
So can you talk a little bit about why you decided to open an axe throwing business and how you went about putting that special Crossroads spin on it?
Kind of the same place where we started with escape rooms. Went and did some axe throwing, had a really good time. I think we ended up going to pretty much all of them in Southern California and realizing that if we opened one, we would add so much more to it and make it so special.
What were some of the things that you thought were missing from other axe throwing businesses?
I felt like all the other ones are missing at least one element. We felt that you have to have projected targets so that you can have various games that you can play, that you have to have alcohol. Most of them don't.
Liquor licenses are hard.
Yeah, exactly. You have to have end grain targets, meaning that you're looking at the very end of the board instead of the side of it. They're just more receptive and easier to throw into because we're not coming at it from a professional axe throwing perspective. We're coming from a general audience. Most of these people are going to throw an axe for the first time, and we want them to have it stick easily in the target. We wanted to have the big axe, just something about throwing a really big axe down the lane, having it land in the target.
What he means by that is they have two sizes of axes at Slashers, and one is like a smaller hatchet that you can throw one-handed, and then there's one with a really long handle. It's 2.5 feet long that has to be thrown overhead with both hands. But especially if you're a bigger guy, I imagine it's really quite satisfying chucking a gigantic axe.
Exactly. There are a couple places that had big axes, but most places only have the hatchets. And that simply comes down to how much space they have, how much room from where you're throwing the axe to the target. We have enough space here to do the large axes. It was important to us that people from ages 13 to 20 were still able to come here and participate. Most places that have alcohol and axe throwing are 21 and up venues. And so that age group is just excluded.
Which I just feel like as a 16-year-old, you're always looking for a cool thing to do for your birthday. Axe throwing would be perfect. I didn't want to not have that availability to those people. 16, 17, 18 is prime birthday party spot.
And because we're open up to just the general crowds and stuff, we designed our lanes and our targets very specifically, adding more safety features in, like matting that prevents the axes from bouncing around, extra walls to divide the lanes so that you're not counting on people to throw and retrieve at the same time. We just saw a lot of things that we were like, this is how you have to make it.
I don't know a lot about axe throwing businesses. In fact, I haven't thrown an axe since scout camp. Are the safety features not universally normal?
No, I mean, there's no rules or requirements.
Of course.
It's really just however you feel it is. And there's a thing called the World Axe Throwing League, WADL, and they have suggestions on what rules and requirements there are. And I have to say, I think they're lacking. These rules and requirements that they have are for professional axe throwers that kind of already know what's the word
their
for
way
it?
Around an axe.
Yeah. It didn't seem to be something that the everyday person would find intuitive. So we added more safety features for us.
Yeah, WADL's rules work great for professionals that are going on to the Olympics to throw axes. But for the general public, I've just seen the WADL setup working for the general public, and you're just like, oh, geez. No. These are not professional axe throwers.
There hasn't been any accidents. I don't want you to think it's dangerous, but we just feel like if you can add more safety precautions, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And I think the reason for most places is because it costs more money to make more walls, to make higher walls, to add no bounce mats. It just costs more. But we felt it was really important to do. Axe throwing was a lot like we were talking about with escape rooms back in the day, where we loved going to them, but they didn't have that immersive atmosphere that we wanted so badly. So that is really, I think, why we decided to open up axe throwing, is because everyone loves a themed bar, right? I like to think of this place as the Rainforest Cafe, but with horror movies and axe throwing. So there's these really cool show effects that happen. We have animatronics. We have a cool themed experience. Your axe coaches are camp counselors.
And they may or may not be possessed.
Yeah. You as customers are campers. So it's just an immersive themed environment, like the moment you step in. And I think that really adds a lot to people's experience here. I think they just have a better time.
I will agree to that. I'll be honest. I thought of axe throwing as something like, I don't know, frat bros did. And so I'd actually never gone before. But when I came to visit, I felt at home in this horror camp environment, but you really did create a truly immersive experience throughout the entire bar. And I also love how you gamified the targets. You have a bunch of different games that you could play with the axe throwing, which really kept my interest and I felt engaged. There's tic-tac-toe, there's Battleship, there's all these different games. And I was like, this is great. And when I was talking to you, Madison, at the bar, you had said that like most axe throwing doesn't have those games at their venues.
Yeah. It's another investment that you have to make. And it's 18 lanes here. So you can imagine 18 tablets, 18 projectors, 18 microcontrollers. It adds up. But it was really important to us because a lot of other places, they just have spray painted bullseyes, which is fun for 20 minutes. And then you just want more of a challenge. So offering these different games allows you to not just always aim for the center of the target. Sometimes you might be trying to get aliens and they're over in the corners. Or we have another one that's like Candy Crush, where these stones drop down and you're trying to get these clusters and stuff. So it just makes it so it's more interesting, more challenging. You can choose which games you like, whether it's competitive or cooperative. Yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't do this. It makes it way more fun.
Because you have the waddle setup, which says you have this target
That's true.
on
If you
these
have
boards,
waddle, then it's
in these lanes. Yeah.
The other big goal was to have more games than could be done in the hour. So you either wanted to extend your time or come back so you can keep exploring the games. And these projected targets also allow us to easily add more games too, without having to like build a whole new set like an escape room would.
For the projected targets, have you developed these games in-house or is this something that you're licensing?
It's a software that we're licensing. It's a new company that we're working with to hopefully add more games to. It is something that we wanted to develop ourselves, but it's a lot.
Time and money.
Yeah.
This makes sense. I mean, look, if you're trying to get a business off the ground and you are obviously trying to make this to a very high level, you can't build everything in-house. It's just never going to be enough.
Yeah, and we know our limits. We are set people. We're builders. We're not software developers. So this would be a really big job for someone else that we would have to fund. And it just got a little overwhelming.
And the work we did on this space was a lot. Pretty much anything you see is us putting it together and painting it and doing it all.
I know you had talked about the struggles when you opened your first escape room, getting permits through the city and zoning requirements, restrictions, things like that. Did you find it more or less difficult when trying to open axe throwing than when trying to open your escape room?
This was worse.
Horrible. So horrible. So Crossroads took 6 months.
Should I get alcohol
to get the permits? I know. I'll get a drink first. This place took 16 months just to get pieces of paper signed. It was really horrible. 16 months of paperwork and then 4.5 months of actual building before we opened. And I can't say it's because we had axes and alcohol like most people think, like, well, that's what took a long time. No, it's just that's how hard it is to open a business. 6 months of that went to counting parking spaces. And we have a private parking lot of 34 spaces. And for some reason, that took 6 months to figure out how many parking spaces we had.
A lot of beard scratching.
It was really horrible.
I've heard other businesses that are like really straightforward businesses that we've all heard of take a year to get their papers.
Yeah, there's a tattoo parlor just down the street that just opened, and he came by and he said it took a year for him to just get his paperwork together for permits.
What could possibly take a year to say, yeah, you can open a tattoo parlor?
I'm glad you guys are finally open. So, Madison, going back to your expertise as a scenic painter, prop designer, and set designer, what is one tip that you wish more escape room creators knew about the craft?
I think it's important for them to pay attention of the entire space. A lot of the times I find that the ceiling and the floor is incomplete or forgotten. Like people just focus on the walls. And I think in order for it to be an immersive experience, you have to do everything: floor, ceilings, walls. And the other thing that bothers me as a scenic painter is for some reason people just think if they paint it black, it goes away. And it drives me crazy because sometimes it's like a white wall and they've painted this support that they need to have black. And it's like, no, painting it white on a white wall would let it disappear. black isn't just this void we don't see. So those are my two things that kind of drive me crazy.
We usually incorporate the ceilings in our rooms into the game somehow.
Yeah, the ceilings are usually even part of the puzzles.
Yeah, it's like this great surface and space to work with.
It's a big canvas.
Yeah. And I have heard from people like, nobody looks up, so you don't have to work on the ceilings. And it's like,
we do.
I look up.
Yeah, I don't believe that that's true. I don't think that if you are triaging and you really are having to figure out where to spend your time and money, the ceiling is probably the last place to go and do it. However, I don't think that it's fair to say that people are truly just ignoring your ceilings. Luke, same question. What's one tip that you wish more escape room creators understood about carpentry or technical direction?
Oh, if it's not your forte, find someone who can do it. Speaking for myself, technology and I are not friends. I now can do some wiring of lights and buttons and small things like that. But me and tech are not friends. We found people who do this kind of stuff all the time, paid them to make our tech work and work every time. And we just know that that's our limit. And so we find people who do it right. I go to some escape rooms and I see things that they tried to build. And it's like, obviously, you don't build things. And that's okay. Just find someone who does. And then focus on the things that you're good at. And your escape room will just be so much better.
I think that really goes to our theater background. In a theater, you have a lighting designer, a sound designer, a set designer. Everyone has their jobs and their specialty skills. And we see that with escape rooms too. We know what we're good at, and we don't know anything about lighting design and sound design. So we hire people to do those things.
I do think that this is something that people often overlook is if you have the fire to learn a new skill, you can. But I think that people underestimate how much time and money and effort it's going to take to develop the level that you'll need to actually pull off the task. And by the time they realize they should have hired someone, they may be many months and a lot of money in the hole and feel like now it's just on them to finish it. But it is an important thing to respect your own limits and to be aware of your own limits, which is a hard thing to do. Some people just have a gap for that. I mean, it's easy to have a gap for that.
Yeah. I would also say that it does cost money to hire people, obviously, especially if they have special skills. We're lacking in the tech department. That's an expensive hole to fill, let me tell you. But because we hire out for those things, we have developed a whole team of people that have a whole range of skills in technology that we can call on for our future projects. Some of them have worked here on Slashers. And we just keep getting a bigger pool of people that we can pull from and use their knowledge and improve our own projects. It's an investment in your future stuff too.
That makes sense. But yeah, I think that you have to pay money to hire people out to do the things. But also I think that delaying your game by a year or 2 or 3 because you don't have the skills to finish the build, you're hemorrhaging money on rent and on your time and materials as you go. There's always this question of on what end are you paying here? Because you're going to pay.
Yeah. And hopefully you become friends with these people that you hire and they can show you a thing or two. Like we've learned so much just because we've been around when things get installed. And once you learn it, then it's like, okay, we could do some of the install work and save money on that because we watched you do it the first time or they gave us pointers. So you also build your skill sets too by hiring these professionals.
I've definitely spoken to a lot of escape room owners who have hired professional scenic painters and then just been a good assistant to them and picked up a lot of skills along the way. You have to be a professional enough to respect the professionals you're hiring and be there to serve them as they're working if you want to learn, but you can pick up a lot from folks.
Yeah, and if they love their craft, they'll love to teach you about it too.
Yeah.
All right, Madison and Luke, I know that you just went through getting Slashers opened, but are there any other projects in your future?
They already want another one.
A vacation is the next project.
Excellent.
That is actually the next project.
But we do have plans, I mentioned before, to redo Funhouse. Not to redo it, but to do a whole new game there. It's going to be a really big project. I don't know how long it's going to take. We to be honest, have not done the steps needed to start it. Although we have like a rough outline.
We have lots of concepts.
We have a lot of concepts. But I will say it's going to be something about cats. And you will be the cat.
Oh, I'm so excited. There is a distinct lack of cat-themed escape rooms. So,
right?
I always look forward to anything that you guys create because everything you do is done to such a high level, high production value, wonderful, interesting, complex puzzles. You have great game masters and the immersion and just everything that you guys do is so thoughtful. And so I'm really looking forward to what you have next. And for anybody who hasn't gone yet, go check out Slashers. It's a lot of fun. You know, you get a little bit of a workout. You can have a beer and hang out with your friends and throw some axes. And if people want to connect with you or follow you, what's the best way for them to do that?
crossroadsescapegames.com. And we also have a Facebook page, which is just Crossroads Escape Games, and an Instagram, which is cross_roads_escape_games. And then we also have Slashers, Axe Throwing, and Ales in Costa Mesa at slashersoc.com or slashers_axe throwing on Instagram.
Okay, and I will have links to all of those very long handles in the show notes.
Madison, Luke, thank you for everything that you do creatively and from an execution standpoint in this immersive space. You have been really pushing so many ideas forward through the experimentation that you do, through the level of care that you put into everything about your games. I cannot imagine the escape room world without Crossroads in it. You have done so much for the collective philosophy and thinking of all of this. It's been a pleasure to hear what you have been doing and learning more about it, but mostly I can never have enough Crossroads escape rooms in my life. So I can't wait for your next game, and when it's ready, I will be there.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you.
Thanks. The Reality Escape Pod is produced by Teresa Piazza with support by Lisa Spira, Richard Burns, and Tommy Houghton. We're edited by Steve Ewing of Stand Inside Media, music by Ryan Elder, logo by Janine Proct, and all of this is brought to you by RoomEscapeArtist.com, your home for well-researched, rational, and reasonably humorous escape room and immersive gaming content and events. If we haven't made it clear enough this season, the Reality Escape Convention, Recon, is happening August 18th and 19th, 2024. And if you buy your tickets before May 1st, you will get special benefits in the form of priority session selection for Imagine Ne'er-Do-Wells and the 49 boxes. Do it now. Get your tickets. We'd also really appreciate it and hope to see you at Recon. You can learn more at realityescapecon.com. Details in the show notes. Believe it or not, we are 10 years into Room Escape Artist. And it took a long time for us to decide that we were going to go and open up a Patreon, but we eventually got there because some loyal readers at the time were really insistent. Over the years, we have added a lot of different things to that Patreon. People at the $5 level get access to the bonus show for this podcast. Folks at the $15 level get the incredible Spoilers Club. But more than anything, they get to support all of the things that we're doing here. And it's hard to tell you just how much that means to PG and I, to the entire team at Room Escape Artist. We put in so much time, so much love, and so much energy into everything that we are doing here to support the escape room and immersive gaming communities, to push them to be safer and more fun, to be smarter and more efficient, to try and pull new players in. We're working on all of these things all the time. And the money and support that we get from our Patreon community is the fuel that keeps all of that moving forward. If you're a part of that, thank you so much. And if you have been considering becoming a part of it, give it a shot. We really, truly will appreciate it. Thanks. You can learn more about all of this at patreon.com/roomescapeartist. Big thank you to our highest level Patreon supporters: Karen, Dawnward, Panic Room, Piyush from SEO Orb, Olivier Escape, Escaparium, Byron Delmonico, Breakout Games, Keystone Escape Games, Derek Tam, Paula Swan, and Rex Miller. Thank you for your ongoing support. And thank you to all of our patrons at all levels.
You've made it to the end of this podcast. You must be an amazing, resilient, and very loyal person. If you're still feeling that delightful afterglow, why don't you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you review your podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. It really means a lot, and it helps us to spread the word.
In the Hex Room, there is a moment where you have a Roman numeral in your room that you have to communicate to another person. And in this case, there were 2 detectives that were trying to get a number from the nerd. And the nerd was saying that the number was 2. And the detectives were just always like, well, the code isn't working, so you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. So finally they're like, what does it look like? So the nerd holds up 2 fingers, and both the detectives scream at him, that's a 5! Because it makes a V.
Yeah.
And the nerd looks at his hands, and he has this moment where his brain just breaks, and he's just like, what?
His life is a lie.
My whole life, I always thought this was 2. And it was amazing.